This is.
You're listening to 24/7 World Radio.
Today, here on this beautiful February 6th, Monday, 2023, and we have with us our general guest on every Monday, second half, and it's Brother George Widger. Brother George, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you.
Always good to have you. Always come with something new, and I take notes and highlight the new thing that you've said and try to remember it and incorporate it in what I'm saying. So, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, I was just thinking maybe you should Mirandize me, and you should say anything I say can and will be used against me.
That's right. Okay, will do. Be careful, George. But I want everybody to know that George Widger does a tremendous job in digging out these facts that he brings to the broadcast. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and for him to do this for us, I deeply appreciate it. I wish I could pay you for it, George, maybe someday, but anyway, I'm just thankful that you're bringing it to us.
Well, you can pay me in Confederate dollars.
Oh, okay. Well, those are nice mementos of the past.
Oh, okay. Or maybe you can pay me in Zimbabwean dollars.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have some value. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
On with the scripture verse and with the presentation. My scripture verse is Proverbs 29, verse 2. Proverbs 29, verse 2. And it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Sorry, I'm a little bit congested this morning, so I'll just plug along. So that is, Solomon wrote that about 3,000 years ago, but he could have written that today.
Amen.
Because I understand, well, today is, here in North America, is February the 6th, but it's already the 7th in New Zealand. And I understand the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has just resigned. And thank God for that, because she was only there a few years, but there are at least two major events that took place under her I think it's, or whatever gender she is, or he is, under her watch.
So he was a transgender. They converted him to a woman.
Well, that's a matter of debate, but I won't go to that subject right now. So you had at least two major events that took place under her watch. You had the whole Corona nonsense, but back on March the 15th, the Ides of March 2019, you had a couple of shootings at a mosque in Christchurch. So basically, now granted, New Zealand, they don't have a Second Amendment, but prior to that, their gun laws were fairly lax because there's
no crime. There's no crime around those white people. That's exactly right. And by the way, that whole thing, that shooting was a black op of the military. It was quietly orchestrated. And I have a friend in Australia I'd like to have on you to fully give a rundown on that, but it was not a random shooting of some angry white man.
So the official story was it was somebody who was like a Islamophobe who didn't like Muslims, and so he decided to shoot up a couple of mosques. But the whole thing is completely bogus. So that just served as a pretext to basically confiscate all the firearms that the Kiwis have. Mm-hmm. So they basically had until the end of the year 2019 to surrender all their weapons under pain of fines of thousands of dollars or up to 10 years in prison.
And they want to disarm those New Zealanders because they want to pave the way for the Red Chinese invasion. So they're not going to be armed and will be easily conquered by the savage Red Chinese army run by the Jesuits. Go ahead.
So they pulled the same game about 23 years earlier in Port Arthur in Tasmania, Australia. Now, you made reference to Australia. So they had this back in April of 1996. I forgot the name of the alleged shooter, but Arthur something or another. And he's supposed to have killed over 30 people. And prior to this, Australia had no national gun laws. Like her neighbor to the east, New Zealand, their gun laws were fairly lax. Now, the Aussies, like the Kiwis, are pretty much disarmed.
That's right. In preparation for the Chinese invasion. That's right. I had a student from Australia. In one of my citizenship classes. He said, yeah, what we did is we buried our guns. I said, well, just make sure you have them packed in grease or whatever in some plastic bag because you're going to need them.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well, when speaking of the so-called land down under, I realize, if the world were a globe, you'd call Australia the land down under, but that's another conversation altogether.
Right.
For some reason, I've been receiving emails from probably like 3 or 4 different Australians. Now, most of them have been from people in the East, places like Sydney, Melbourne, New South Wales, Victoria, and places like Queensland. But I actually got an email from somebody in the East, in Perth, which is the West, Perth, which is Western Australia. And so this fellow was telling me that the tyranny there in Perth has been just as bad as it's been anywhere else in Australia in terms of the shutdowns, the restrictions, the curfews. And it seems as if the Aussies.
And I want to add, this is not possible without the papacy overseeing the secret societies, particularly the Masonic Lodge in Australia, bringing this to pass.
Okay,
Right?
well, case in point, the Attorney General for West Australia is a fellow by the name John Quigley. He's of Irish Catholic descent, and he went to Aquinas College in Perth.
Is that after St. Thomas Aquinas?
Correct.
The Thomas Aquinas that wrote his Magnus Opus Summa Theologica that advocates the killing of heretics after the first and second admonition, hand the heretic over the secular arm to be burned. Is that the same Thomas Aquinas?
Correct.
Thank
And
you.
the Jesuits consider him to be an honorary Jesuit.
That's right. The Jesuits love Aquinas. Go ahead.
So, anyhow, he said, they say, well, if the Jesuits had been around at the time of Aquinas, he would have joined them. But
Of course.
that's another conversation altogether. Now, however, as I made reference to Proverbs 29, verse 2, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. However, it's been a long time since that's happened. Now, I wasn't alive when Franklin Roosevelt was president, and I was alive when Lyndon Johnson he died in 1973, but he just left office before I was born. So, in terms of recent memories, those are 2 of the most tyrannical presidents we've had.
What were they? What were they? They were white, right? White.
Correct.
Remember, following what I'm teaching, the most evil men in the world are white. They were white. They were Masons, Scottish Rite Freemasons, and they were. FDR got an honorary degree from Fordham in 1929, and FDR or LBJ went to school at Georgetown for a year. So they're Jesuit trained, Jesuit honored, Freemasons, white, busy doing the bidding of the papacy. And absolutely, FDR takes our gold, and Johnson took our silver coins.
Mm-hmm. Well, just getting back to Ardern, the now ex-prime minister of New Zealand. Now here, okay, she purports to be a woman, so I'll just refer to her as she or her. She grew up Mormon, which is a Masonic religion, which was a creation of the Jesuits back in the 19th century.
That's correct.
So, Ardern is almost certainly Eastern Star or the equivalent. And
how do you spell her name, George?
Ahern, I believe. Ahern. I had to check the spelling on that. I can get you the correct spelling.
Ahern, okay.
During the break, or you can just type in New Zealand Prime Minister. Anyhow, so she's also a member of the World Economic Forum, which is a creation of Klaus Schwab back in 1971, who was trained by the Jesuits. He got his PhD from University of Freiburg. He was also purportedly a Knight of Malta of some sort and a Freemason. So people will talk all day and all night about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, but most don't talk about who's pulling the strings behind them.
That's right. And I have Klaus Schwab. He speaks at. I'm sorry you're not well, brother. I'll talk with you about it after the broadcast to help you with that. But anyway, Schwab was a featured speaker at, I believe it was Boston College with the Jesuits. So they love him. He is their boy in the attempt to organize the powerful nations of the world financially.
Well, it's interesting, but we're talking largely about politicians, but you could be talking about governmental officials, such as your so-called health ministers. And it's probably better to call them unhealth or anti-health ministers because almost all the policies they've advocated have been detrimental to our well-being, such as stay home, wear, and this has been the case for a long time, for decades.
And is fulfilling the Jesuit order's Counter-Reformation Council of Trent. Okay, go ahead.
So, I mean, how many times have these medical experts told us things over the decades that were actually just the opposite of what we should be doing? Oh, take fluoride; it's good for your teeth.
Cholesterol is no good for you. Yeah, it's just a typical satanic usage of a wicked organization, the AMA, to further destroy white Protestant Western civilization.
Now, I know I mentioned this before. The founder of the CDC, the Catholic disease creator, the Center for Disease Control.
The Catholic disease creator. Oh, George, you sound like a bigot. Go ahead. Who's the founder?
Was Joseph Mountain. He lived from 1891 to 1952. Mountain got his undergrad and medical degrees from Marquette.
Jesuit Marquette University in Wisconsin. Okay.
Correct.
So the Jesuits with their CDC. And by the way, the CDC's is now connected with the filing of all the birth certificates. I covered that in my class. So they're keeping stock on all their assets through the birth certificates. Mm-hmm.
Well, anyhow, so I know we've mentioned probably Anthony Fauci probably at least once a month over the last 3 years. And he just retired at the end of last year. And I'm not sure if he's going to be working on his golf game or something. But the fellow who's probably going to be replacing him is a professor at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Now, as I said, Baylor was historically a Baptist school.
Yeah, it's a Southern Baptist school. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't mean to
departed from the faith, full of heresies. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Hotez has been all on board. Hotez has said the government should.
Now, who's this guy? Hotez is going to take over from Fauci?
Yes.
Well, how do you spell his name?
Hotez or Z, or as other people say, Hotez. Now, he is of a German Jewish background. I don't mean to pick on him.
No, the race is important. We always talk about race here.
Okay.
It's very, very important. He's German and Jewish.
Okay, so he...
so we can get him to do some outrageous things. So we can blame all the Jews in general. Okay, got it? Okay.
Okay, so back in 2016, he went to a Vatican conference on health, where he was there. He was joined with Fauci and various other medical people. So Hotez is probably going to be taking over for Fauci. Now, I'm not sure when this happened, but Hotez wrote a book a few years ago called Not Give My Daughter Autism. His daughter, Emily, has a form of autism, and Hotez has vehemently denied that there's a nexus between and her condition.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, he's got to say that because he's a Jesuit Coadjutor. You can't make the connection to Guillain-Barré, and you just can't do that because that's an attack on the medical Inquisition, the Jesuit Medica. Yeah, go ahead.
So anyhow, so he's most likely Hotez is probably, as I said, is probably going to be taking over for Fauci, and so as I said, for the last 3 years, he's been all on board for this tyranny, the shutting down of businesses, you name it. And he's
because remember, the shutting down of businesses is a destruction of the middle class, pursuant to the quest of the Counter-Reformation, because you can't have a middle class, so therefore you can't have private businesses. It's all got to be cartel capitalist corporations. Yeah, perfect. So this whole thing furthers the Counter-Reformation. I want my listeners to know that. So that's why there's no secret, or it is understandable. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, here's a little factor. I just read this last week. Did you know that 1/4, 25% of all the health clubs and gyms that closed in 2020 did not reopen?
25% of all the health clubs did not reopen.
Correct. Because
gyms and stuff like that.
Yes. So now the ones that did survive were the corporate places like Planet Fitness and others, but the individual gyms got wiped out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a number that decided to stay open, and they had to engage in all sorts of legal battles. They're threatened to be sued and have their being thrown into prison. Depending upon this, especially in places like California and New York. And I'm talking about
Socialist Communist California and Socialist Communist New York. Yeah, I got it. Mm-hmm. Run by the fanatical Jesuits out of University of San Francisco, Loyola in Los Angeles, and Fordham in New York, and I think there's another Jesuit university in Buffalo. But go ahead.
Yes, there is. I forgot. Okay, I should go look up the name of the one in Buffalo. But you also have other schools. You have Dominican College in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. You also have St. Mary's College in La Moraga. So you have Jesuit schools, and then you have non-Jesuit Catholic schools. But for all intents and purposes, they're
That's right.
Jesuit.
Yeah, that's right. Because the doctrines they teach are the same doctrines the Jesuits teach, which are socialist communism, and the destruction of individuality, the destruction of rugged manhood, particularly rugged American manhood. Got to destroy those males that are, what do you call it? Toxic manhood. You got to destroy all that, because you can't have individuality, because that produces a middle class.
Well, we're talking about the shooting situations in New Zealand back in 2019, in Australia back in the 1990s. Well, last month there were several so-called mass shootings on the West Coast, 3 in California and 1 in Yakima, Washington. I can talk about the California shootings in just a moment, but I'd like to address the Yakima shooting first, which took place on Tuesday, the 24th. Now, Yakima has a population of about maybe 100,000 people, so it's not that big. However, despite that, the chief of police for Yakima is Matthew Murray, and he got his undergrad degree from Regis University in Denver, Colorado.
So the chief of police is a good Irish Catholic.
Correct.
Another good Catholic, an Irish Catholic, Murray. And he is educated by who?
The Jesuits at Regis University.
And Regis. And where is Regis?
Well, it's in Aurora, Colorado, which is just outside of Denver.
Just outside of Denver. So, Regis is the Jesuits at Regis control the Archbishop of Denver. The Jesuits at Regis control Colorado Springs and Denver, all the military, the Air Force Academy there. They control all the deep underground bases that the CIA has, in fact, moved to that particular area. So the Jesuits of Regis are very, very powerful. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, so you had the shooting, as I said, last month on the 24th. It was actually at a convenience store just outside of Yakima, or in Yakima. And the shooter was supposed to have shot 4 people and killed 3 of them. And so I actually know somebody who lives near Yakima, and he decided bless you, he decided to do some investigation. And
give me your cold, George.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So the whole thing just seems odd. That it almost seems like a CIA operation.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then now that was on Tuesday, the 24th. Over the weekend, you had a number of mass shootings in California. Monterey Park, which is just outside of LA. You also had Half Moon Bay, which is just south of San Francisco. And then you had a mass shooting in Oakland. Well, the thing is about Oakland, that's not a big deal, but that happens all the time.
No, Oakland is savage black. I was born there. I know what happened to that city. It was a beautiful white town. There's a little Lake Merritt there. All the white women after World War II would be walking their babies, wrapping their babies into strollers and talking. It was a beautiful little place. It was totally savage black now. And what I understand is that the Mexicans, the savage alien Hispanics, came up there and they drove out the blacks. So between the warfare, the Hispanics and the blacks, they destroyed Oakland. Mm-hmm.
Well, something that after the shootings in California, such as in Monterey Park, Gavin Newsom, the Emperor of California, came out and said,
the Roman Catholic Emperor. Always tell his religion. That's very enlightening, because I think we can draw some conclusions. Go ahead.
Okay. the Jesuitically trained Freemasonic Roman Catholic sexual deviant pervert.
George, I love you for it. Those are all proper adjectives. Amen. Very good.
And no, I wasn't talking about Justin Castro Trudeau, the Emperor of Canada, or I wasn't talking about Andrew Cuomo, the ex-Emperor of New York. But I could be talking about the current Empress of New York, Kathleen Hochul. It's just like these people seem to be megalomaniacs.
Yeah, and they love their sexual perversion, and they all go to Epstein Island. And they just love it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, it's just like their attitude seems to be is that you can never impose too much tyranny.
That's right. You know, I had a black student from New York, older man. He and his wife came. They were lovely people. He said, Eric, he said, I approached the governor of New York about taxes here. He said, I had devised a way to lower the tax rate, but also then to raise revenue. And you know what he said? You know what the guy said to me, Eric? I said, he said, if we need more money, we just raise taxes. And that was so depressing to him. It wasn't long after that he passed away. But here's a decent white man suffering, a decent black man suffering under the tyranny of Roman Catholic white power structure. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I looked at this as Canisius College in Buffalo, New York.
Canisius. That's right. Canisius, the German Jesuit who helped bring about the 30 Years' War. Yeah, that wicked sinner. Okay, got it.
Well, wow. So at least I'm sure his parents must have been proud of him.
Oh, I'm sure. Got to get rid of those Protestants. Got to get everybody sewing to the Pope.
So, you're talking about 40 years ago, 30 years war. Well, that reminds me, that's an interesting segue because I came across this fellow's name a couple weeks ago. Are you familiar with Douglas Fife?
Fife? No, I'm not.
Not Barney Fife, from the old.
I'm familiar with him. He was one of my heroes with his one bullet. Yeah.
So back when law enforcement was a little bit less fascistic, but Douglas Fife was born on July the 16th, 1953. Now you said Canisius was one of the architects of the 30 Years' War. Well,
yes, he was. Douglas Fife, F-I-F-E. Is that what you said? Douglas Fife?
Correct. He was born. So I don't mean to keep picking on him. I don't mean to keep. Yes, he is of a Polish Jewish background, and he got his law degree from Georgetown University. So
remember, the Jesuits always loved to use the Jews because they're the most intelligent of all the races. So they love using them. So this guy is partially Polish and partially Jewish. Who was the mother or the father of the Jew?
Well, I believe he's Jewish on both sides, but he's a German.
Oh, okay. I see. German, full-blooded Jew. I see. Okay. Yeah. So they love using them because they're the most brilliant people in the world. And when they use these brilliant Jews for evil, none can match them. Yeah.
Anyhow, he was one of the architects of the Iraq War. So you mentioned the 30 Years' War, or the first 30 Years' War. So his position, he was in the George W. Bush administration, and he was the Undersecretary for Policy in for the United States. He was also
Undersecretary for what? Undersecretary for what now?
Defense.
Undersecretary for Policy?
Correct.
Okay. And he starts the Iraq War, at least he orchestrates it.
Yes. Now, as I said, two of his sons, his son David is an assistant attorney general for the Justice Department.
So what he's involved in orchestrating the Iraqi war is for the destruction of Shia Islam, and also to further secure the borders of Israel, regarded by the Pope as the revived Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. Not that the Jews don't have a right to that land, but they look at it as the revived Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. So I see how he would be used to foment that. Okay.
Okay. So both of his sons, two of his sons, Daniel and David, have been fairly successful themselves in their own right. Daniel, is an assistant attorney general for the Justice Department, and his son David is a writer for the Wall Street Journal, is a professor at Columbia, and he's an editor for Foreign Affairs magazine.
Editor for Foreign Affairs, is that what you said?
Magazine, correct.
Okay, Foreign Affairs is the quarterly that comes out for the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Archbishop of New York oversees and runs the Council on Foreign Relations, and thus oversees the publication of Foreign Affairs, which are going to tell you what this military government is going to do in the future through that particular publication. So these two Jews are busy working for the Pope's white power structure, facilitating what he wants, the destruction of white Protestant Western civilization, the building of the revived Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. And they're also betraying their own Jewish people here in America that are going to be mass murdered when the new right comes to power. So congratulations, Daniel and David Fife. You're doing a great job.
And of course, Doug is their dad.
And Doug is the dad. Mm-hmm. Yep. There's probably 300 Jews in the Council on Foreign Relations. If you get their annual report and just count all the Jewish names in there, that's about how many there are. And they're all working for the Pope. They're not working for themselves. There's no such thing as Jewish supremacy. No, the Jews are not running Israel. That's correct. The papacy is using their Masonic Jewish scoundrels like Netanyahu and others. Go ahead.
Or as Michael Savage calls them, Nitwit Yahoo.
Is that what Savage called him? Nitwit Yahoo? Good for Michael Savage. I just was concerned about him. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and he also calls, they called Andrew Cuomo Governor Meatball.
Governor Meatball. Well, here's another Italian Roman Catholic with his brother Chris, being the typical Italian Catholic tyrants that they are, working for the Pope. Condescending, arrogant. Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, and of course, he calls Michael Savage calls Chris Fredo.
Oh, Fredo. Of the Mafia movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for Michael. I think Michael's off the air now, but he said many, many true things. But he should have never wanted to have Pius XII canonized. And that's what Michael Savage advocated. Anyway, back in a moment, 24/7 World Radio, Brother Eric John Phelps with Brother George Widger here on this Monday, February the 6th. 7th. 6th.
This is the Eric John Phelps Show on 24/7 World Radio.
This is Brother Nicholas. Join me every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the German Bible Truth Hour and at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Dutch Bible Truth Hour on 24/7 World Radio. This is Bruder Nicholas. Ich lade euch herzlich ein, mich anzuhören jeder Dienstag am 2 Uhr nachmittags, amerikanische Zeit, für die deutsche Bibelwahrheitsstunde und 3 Uhr amerikanische Standardzeit für die niederländische Bibelwahrheitsstunde am World Radio 24/7. Dit is broeder Nico. U bent hartelijk uitgenodigd om elke dinsdag om 2 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Duitse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen en 3 uur Amerikaanse standaardtijd het Nederlandse Bijbelwaarheidsuur te volgen op 24/7 World Radio.
This is 24/7 World Radio, and you're listening to The Eric John Phelps Show.
Continuing on with Brother George Widger, as you know, he just gives all these wonderful facts here that only George seems to be able to find. So, George, please continue on.
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, people, if they just take the time, they can do this stuff on their own, but I realize people are busy doing other things. And I think my greatest asset is also my greatest liability. I have a high threshold for boredom.
A high threshold for boredom. Well, you know, doing this kind of digging is very tedious, and it's not easy. And so I just want to thank you. I'm sure the listeners are appreciative too, because everybody's busy working, trying to support their family. And they don't have time, they don't have time to look this stuff up. But as you look it up, you give it to them. So they have one more piece of evidence to sustain our general proposition. So go ahead.
And of course, you know, people are busy, and of course, you know, they have the ball game to watch, and they have their entertainments and so forth. And I get that. Now,
yeah, all the total waste of time that we need
Well,
to stop doing.
you know,
Go ahead.
speaking of when the wicked are in power, do you know who Jason Kinney is?
No, I don't.
Okay, so what does that sound like?
That sounds like Irish Catholic to me.
Well, yes, he was the premier of Alberta, Canada, and he could give Justin Trudeau or Doug Ford a run for his money in terms of how tyrannical he was. There are a number of churches that
So Alberta is a historically Protestant province. So is it any wonder why they would have these tyrants?
Yes, so I forgot the name of it, but there's a church that's pastored by a fellow from two brothers, I believe, from Poland, Arta and David Mikowski. And so they decided to remain it open, and they said this whole thing is a hoax. And Arta, I understand, although he's about 50 or so, he's in excellent shape. You know, he's been practicing judo. He knows how to breathe properly. He knows proper diet. And so they decided to fine him thousands of dollars and to threaten to throw him in prison for keeping his church open.
Oh, yes. Okay, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
And well, the thing is, I'm not sure. What is this about the Poles? They seem to have this rebellious streak in them.
Yeah, the Polish manhood is very nationalistic, and they don't like to go along with tyranny. And that's why the orchestrated mass death of the Polish men was carried out towards the end of World War II when Stalin refused to come to their aid when they had the Warsaw Uprising. So Stalin and Hitler were working together. The Jesuits made sure that the German army there would massacre, kill tens of thousands of them to make the rule of the Cold War when the Jesuit USSR would take over Poland much easier. You just got rid of all that Polish manhood.
Yep. Well, of course. Now, okay, this is another conversation altogether. But you did it at the beginning of the 20th century in what is now Poland. I know it's called different things. You did have a fairly sizable Protestant population in what is now Poland. But by the end of the Second 30 Years' War, World War II, almost all of that had disappeared.
That's right.
Almost all the Protestants in Germany had either been killed or driven out.
You mean Germany or Poland?
I'm sorry, Poland.
That's right. And there were 300 Jewish areas or small communities that were Messianic Jews. And so they all had to be rounded up too. We never told about the Messianic Jews of Poland. So that's another reason they killed them all.
So anyway, well, getting up to my point. So I was telling you about these mass shootings that took place at the end of last month on the West Coast, California and Washington State. So I told you who runs Yakima, Washington. I talked about the chief of police, the fact that he was trained by the Jesuits. And now I can understand in major jurisdictions like California, New York City, Chicago, so forth, while the Jesuits be controlled. However, it seems even in relatively small area, they seem to have hegemony, such as the aforementioned Yakima, which only has about maybe 100,000 people, and the Australian state of West Australia. It only has about maybe 2 million people. So they seem to want to control it all.
Well, and they do it through Masonic secret societies. That's their big tool in this. Remember, the Council of Wilhelmsbad, 1783, sought to unite all the Masonic secret societies, and they ultimately did. While Jesuits had written the Scottish Rite, Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the mid 1700s. So, towards the end, they united it all, and the Council of Wilhelmsbad and set up their new headquarters in Charleston in 1801. So, they always do it through Freemasonry. Wherever there's some sort of treason or murder or war being fomented, the Masons are right up front.
Okay, so if I could just mention a couple other things before I realize we have 20-ish minutes. Now, you said you grew up in Oakland, California. You're actually born there, and
I was born there. I didn't grow up there, but I was born there. Yeah.
Okay, so in the 1940s and 50s, it was a white town.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like Detroit, Michigan used to be a white.
That's right.
Cleveland, Ohio used to be a white town. But fill in the blank.
Oh, you bring in the blacks, majority savage blacks, you destroyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I had a mulatto lady that come to one of my classes out in California. She said, Eric, I used to listen to you. I listened to you and I thought you were some sort of a racist and bigot. And I listened to you some more and I realized you were entirely right. The only solution to this is racial separation under nationhood. And she was a principal very high up in a particular California public school there in Oakland. Yeah. So when they come in like that and they've destroyed they've destroyed a portion of every major city in this country, that's a fact. And the question is why, of course, but that's another conversation. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wonder if she knows Dan Kalb, who's on the city council for Oakland. He is of a German Jewish background, but he got his master's degree from University of San Francisco, and he was basically the Libby Schaaf's right-hand man when she was mayor of Oakland. So he was the one who was directing her policies. Now, as I said, Libby Schaaf, the now ex-mayor of Oakland, is of a Dutch Jewish background, but she got her law degree from Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles.
So we have a Jesuit-trained Jew running a black town and further having it run down into trash. That's interesting.
Yes. Not one, but two. You had Dan Kalb, who is of a German Jewish background. He got his master's degree from University of San Francisco. And then you had Libby Schaaf, who just said her term just ended. So she got
So you have two successive Jews trained by Jesuits at their universities running the city of Oakland.
Correct.
And Oakland is bankrupt.
Yes. So anyhow, I think I could survive, to finish out the show.
You might get a glass of water if you want. I mean, go ahead.
Well, no, I'll just hang on, and yes, I'll make sure that I'm in operation. I'm operational next Monday. So anyhow, the just I was going to mention something that one of the shootings that took place last month was in Half Moon Bay, which is in San Mateo County, just south of San Francisco.
Half Moon Bay. Man, Half Moon Bay has all sorts of memories for me because that's where we used to have the dragster races. The drags were in Half Moon Bay, yeah. Don Perdome and McEwen, the Mongoose, and yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Half Moon Bay only has a population maybe about 11,000. They almost never have any sort of shootings there. I mean, it's been years prior to last month that they'd had one. So you had to wonder who's running San Mateo County. Well, to give you a clue, San Mateo County is sandwiched in between San Francisco and Santa Clara County. So you have University of San Francisco and you have Santa Clara University. And
both Jesuit universities.
Correct. So the chief executive officer for San Mateo County is a fellow by the name of Mike Kalanke. He got his undergrad degree from Notre Dame. He got his law degree from Santa Clara University. So does that answer the question who runs San Mateo County?
No doubt. And he probably went to Notre Dame when there was notorious Theodore Hesburgh. Theodore Hesburgh was there, the most decorated Catholic priest in this country for honorary degrees. He had an excess of 140. Go ahead. Okay,
so something I wanted to bring up, and I brought this up before, but I mentioned it in passing. Have you seen the 1982 film Rambo: First Blood?
Sure did. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it came out on October the 22nd of that year, and I saw it when it actually came out, and I said, "Oh, that's great! It has all these explosions," and I was into that sort of stuff, but I didn't appreciate the deeper meaning of it. So for those who've not seen it, and I would recommend it, other than I'd have some caveats about the language, but it's about this character. I'm talking about the film version. I'm not talking about the novel, and I'd like to address the novel. So it's about this special forces soldier played by Sylvester Stallone, and his name is John Rambo. He goes to this town in Washington State, I'd hope, to come across to look up an old army buddy, but he finds out by talking to his widow, the army buddy's widow, that he died the previous summer from cancer, from Agent Orange. So that leaves Rambo, with the exception of his commander, is the sole surviving member of his unit. And so, he's distraught. And so he decides to pick up the pieces, and he's walking into this town where he comes across a psychotic sheriff played by Brian Dennehy, Irish Roman Catholic Brian Dennehy. Now, Stallone is also Italian Roman Catholic. Interestingly enough, he shares the same birthday as George W. Bush, July the 6th, 1946. And so the sheriff in this town decides to run out Rambo because he looks like a bum. He looks disheveled, his hair is long, he's unshaven, and he has an old army coat. And he basically says, we don't want your type in our town. And so Rambo decides to defy the brother. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Go ahead.
Okay, so he decides to. Okay, I don't want to give a complete summary of the whole film, but as I said, you have this mean sheriff who's he goes above and beyond the call of duty to be obnoxious to Rambo.
Very cocky, very arrogant, very lawless, tough guy, king poop. And yeah, he's a very arrogant guy, and I'm sure that there have been many police officers like that, unfortunately.
Okay, so
Sure.
anyhow, they decided to arrest him for vagrancy, and he has a flashback when they're going to shave him, and he takes out a bunch of deputies. He doesn't kill any of them, but he escapes, and then his old commander, played by the Freemasonic Richard Crenna, comes to his rescue. And I'm paraphrasing. I would recommend people see this. So why do I bring this up? And why am I talking about a film that came out 40 years ago? Well, I could actually relate to his character because my dad was not Special Forces. He was Career Air Force. He was stationed in Vietnam, 67, 68. And he was at Cam Ranh Bay in Phuket. And when he was on the flight back to the United States, they're supposed to have landed SFO. But they decided to divert the plane to SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma. And the stewardess said point blank, by the way, for those of you in uniform, we suggest you go in the head and change into your civvies because you're probably not going to get a very warm reception. And she was correct. They threw rocks at him and all the other servicemen. They call them baby killers. And so
that was the Jesuit anti-war agitation, further building the radical left for today, while at the same time driving the Vietnam vets and also their heritage, their posterity, into the new right. They've been at this for, 40 years now. Mm-hmm. And also using Hollywood because the Jesuits run Hollywood.
So this was in 1968. You're talking March, so you're talking 55 years ago. So my dad said, you know what? He didn't want to be there. He wasn't sure why he was there, but all he knew is he was ordered to do so, and he couldn't understand the logic or the illogic behind it. Now I'm just talking about my dad's perspective. I'm not talking about big picture. And he said, now he got out of the Air Force in '72, and he didn't grow long hair, but he grew the long sideburns and the handlebar mustache, which was the fashion of the day. But he said he wanted to divorce himself from his Air Force background as much as possible. Although, if you looked at his closet, he looked as if he was still in the Air Force because all of his shirts were in a neat rows. He had hospital corners on his bed and all that sort of stuff. He always polished his shoes.
Yeah.
But
he had discipline. He had discipline.
Well,
the generation now doesn't make their bed. They flop out of bed, throw the sheets or whatever, don't even touch it, and then you go do what they do. They never make their bed. They're totally undisciplined. That's just what the Jesuits want, because when you have an undisciplined culture, they can't fight in any disciplined army. That's exactly what they want. Go ahead.
So getting back to Rambo, it was based on a book by a 1972 novel by David Morrell, who was actually went to a Jesuit high school in Canada. I forgot the name of it. So I could, as I said, empathize and sympathize with John Rambo because he thought he was serving his country, but they basically dumped on him. and they treat him like yesterday's newspaper. And they actually, one of the things they mentioned is they say when he's talking to his commander, Richard Crenna, Colonel Trotman, he said, you know what, they call those baby killers. You know, I operate equipment that's worth millions of dollars. Now I can't even wash dishes or dig ditches. And so
that was part of the agitation to deliberately lose the war. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, when he said he can't wash dishes or dig ditches, he can't concentrate because he has a hard time dealing with authority or conflict. So the only thing he knows how to do is kill. So as I said, that was a somewhat realistic character because of Operation Phoenix and MK Ultra. What they did is they took thousands, tens of thousands of young men and turned them into basically monsters.
And the one behind that was William Colby. Died of Malta, next head of the CIA, but he oversaw Operation Phoenix. You know, killed 40,000 Vietnamese. Yeah.
So anyhow, so the attitude for Rambo was they didn't even say thank you for your service. Now go drop dead. They said, well, you outlived your usefulness. Now go away and leave us alone. And so that was like. Rambo was one of the first movies. He had the Deer Hunter, but it was one of the first movies to actually address the plight of the Vietnam vets, and to where, because maybe our country didn't treat them the way they should have been treated. Now,
let's be clear. Maybe the military government didn't treat them the way they should be treated. The average American would not have treated them like that. But it's the military government. We should always say it's the military government.
Well, yes. Well, thank you for the clarification. So then you had this whole in the 1980s, you had this whole rewriting of history. It said, you know what? Well, thank you. Well, maybe we should honor the Vietnam vets. Well, we called them baby killers in the 60s and 70s, but now they're our heroes. They serve the. So do you see the psychological change here?
Well, sure, because you're going to have to go to war again. So you're going to go to war again in Iraq. So we can't call them baby killers because their sons are going to be drafted. And if their sons think their fathers are baby killers, they're not going to want to go fight. So I'm sure that's why they did it. Mm-hmm.
So then you had the whole MIA movement, POW movement that was spearheaded by the likes of Robert.
Ross Perot wanted to go get them MIAs. He hired Bo Grice to do it. Go ahead.
Well, you had the congressman from California, Robert Dornan, who actually got this idea in Congress for a congressman to wear these bracelets, the MIA POW bracelets. Now, Dornan is a devout Roman Catholic. He studied at Columbus. He went to Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles. Yeah.
I thought Dornan was in Illinois. I thought he was a senator in Illinois. Is it another Dornan?
Dick Durbin, Richard Durbin.
Oh, Dick Durbin. Okay, that's the guy. Okay, this guy's Dornan.
Who went to Georgetown, by the way. During the 1980s, you had Robert Dornan, who was supposed to be this big agitator. He said, and he was a big opponent of Bill Clinton when he was in office. He called Bill Clinton a coward, a womanizer, skirt chaser, all that sort of stuff. And I used to actually like Dornan. He used to fill in for Rush Limbaugh during the 1990s. So I just realized Dornan was simply an actor playing a part. I mean, he literally is an actor.
Building the new right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a matter of fact, he was on TV shows like 12 O'Clock High back in the 1960s. So he is an actor. So he is playing the part of the conservative. He would trash talk about Bill Clinton and others on the left. And so that would help to create the new right, I guess.
Yes, correct.
And so, anyhow, so what do you think? Quick question: what do you think the purpose of Rambo was, the first movie? I'm not talking about the franchise.
Well, I think the player, the character that Sylvester Stallone played was very right in his position. They had been viciously mistreated when they came back from Vietnam, but Obviously, the Vietnamese War was an awful, terrible war. It could have been ended within 6 months if Haiphong Harbor would have been bombed, and they could not. Then the North could not get their supplies in from Russia. It would have ended it. That's why they removed Nixon when he decided to bomb it. So it was a deliberately carried out war for 30 years, from 45 to 75, for the destruction of more white American manhood, for the demoralization of American men, to then ultimately be ready for the move of the new right, which starts in the 80s. It's Phyllis Schlafly and all the other new right people, William F. Buckley, and yeah. So I think it was an agitation to ultimately drive frustrated white men of the Vietnam War into the new right.
Okay, so anyhow, the well, I wish I had more time, but I had to pick this up. But so.
Well, that's okay, brother. We can end this a little early because I have an announcement to make for the listeners.
Okay, so we should be on next Monday.
Next Monday, Lord willing. Amen, brother.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So people have any questions, comments, or concerns, if they want to send me an article, video, whatever, or they just want to say hello, just drop me a line at George Widger, 1969@gmail.com, GEORWDGER. Also, please let me know where you're writing from. And I'd be especially interested if you're writing from outside the United States. And I've heard from everybody from the British Isles, except for Wales. If you have any Welsh listeners, if you're a Welsh listener, please say hello.
Okay. Very good, George. Okay, Lord bless, and I'll see you next Monday.
Oh, okay. Well,
please listen to my announcement, okay?
Sir?
Please listen to what I have to say.
Oh, okay.
All right, Lord bless. All right, Brother Eric John Phelps, thanking you for tuning in today, and I have a short announcement that I would like to make. I'll probably be giving it periodically till the end of February. But the host for this radio station is no longer able to host it, and so I'm looking for another host for 24/7 World Radio. So I appreciate your prayers to that end. We have some wonderful broadcasters here. We got Eric Rodriguez, who's just brilliant, and I love to listen to him. And we also have Brother Nico. He is in Germany and the Netherlands. He broadcasts in both German and Dutch. He also has a ministry in Pakistan. And it's Brother Nico that introduced me to Brother Lordson Roth, who has his regular broadcast on once a week here. And he is, I maintain Lordson is probably one of the foremost evangelists in India. And it's my privilege to host him. So we also have Brother Vlad. Brother Vlad is a racial Jew who knows the Lord, who is nationalist. National nation is Russia. So that's why we have Russia Awake under Brother Vlad's preaching here and teaching. And so through Vlad and Nico and Eric and myself, I believe we have a very important ministry, and we're tying everything back to the papacy, to the Jesuit order, that they run it all. And specifically here in America, since the Jesuits imposed emergency war powers military jurisdiction, and it's government, emergency war powers military government on March 9th, 1933. And then they used this as a basis for the New World Order to conquer all the nations of the world militarily and economically. And so now they're pretty much done with American empire, and they're building their Chinese empire, the Russian empire, and their Middle Eastern Sunni empire to take its place. So we see the destruction of our country in full force. And so this broadcast will continue to denounce the papacy and its Jesuits and their secret societies, and continue to expose the means by which they do this, which includes the destruction of the white race peoples in Canada and America, which includes the disarming of us to further prepare us for invaders that we can't fight. So this broadcast will continue to do what I've always done for the last 10 years. I'm thankful that we were hosted for 10 years by our particular host. And we need another host, so appreciate your prayers. And if any of you have any ideas, we would greatly appreciate that. The only other alternative is we all go to Substack individually and do our broadcast. But I would like to preserve the radio station, and I think we have things to offer you for your help. So appreciate your prayers to that end. And Lord willing, I'll be with you on Wednesday. I'll be off on Friday and back with George on next Wednesday. So Lord bless, and we'll see you then. We appreciate your prayers. Maranatha.